Aloha, I'm Jan ten Bruggencade, and this is the Pacific Network. The Nature Conservancy of Hawaii and Alexander and Baldwin recently signed a 7,000-acre preservation agreement at Upper Wainiha Valley and the Alakai Plateau. I have with me Sam Gon, the senior scientist and cultural advisor to the Conservancy. Sam, what's the significance of this area?
Well, Jan, this is really a milestone for conservation, not only for the state of Hawaii, but probably on a global level. The island of Kauai, where this new preserve is remarkable within an even more remarkable island chain. The islands of Hawaii, of course, are one of the hot spots in conservation, recognized by just about every major conservation organization that's in existence. And so the Nature Conservancy, in its 20-plus years of work in the Hawaiian Islands, had never up until this point established anything major as far as a preserve on the island of Kauai. And now, with the acquisition of Wainiha, 7,050 acres, it makes it the third largest private preserve in the island chain.
Sam, what's the significance of this area?
There are no islands that are as isolated and as rich in species that can be found nowhere else in the world as the Hawaiian Islands, and Kauai is a standout within that island chain. Kauai is the oldest of the large Hawaiian Islands, it's the most isolated of them, and so of the 1,200 different kinds of native plants, for example, that can be found in the Hawaiian Islands, there are a large percentage that can be found only on the island of Kauai. In fact, in Wainiha Preserve, there are fully 130 or so species of native plants that can be found only in the Hawaiian Islands, and of those, about 40 of them are only to be found on Kauai.
Sam, most people are never going to see this place. Could you describe the terrain at the back of Wainiha and on the plateau of Alakai?
Wainiha Valley is one of the largest and longest valleys on the island of Kauai, and it cuts from the coast all the way up into the heart, the very center of the island of Kauai. And in fact, right at its head, above it, are Mount Waialeale and Kauaikini, two of the highest peaks on the island. Waialeale is famous for being the wettest spot on Earth in many people's accountings. Waialeale is the apex of the Alakai Wilderness, which is a flat, boggy area, completely cloud-shrouded, and with a wide complement of plants and animals that can be found nowhere else except in these kinds of bog ecosystems. In Wainiha, because of its distance from civilization and the effects of history, we see native forest coming down these wet cliffs and all the way down to the boulders of the stream. It's an amazing place, and only a handful of sites in the whole Hawaiian chain has an ecosystem as intact as that.
Sam, surely Native Hawaiians use this area, and it's reputed to be the last refuge of the Menehune. What's the cultural significance of this area?
Well, as you pointed out, Wainiha was one of the places where Hawaiians lived. Anytime that you have Hawaiians living in a place, they're typically down in the lowlands and by the sea. And the upper portions of the valley were held sacred as Wawakua, the realm of the gods. And so not only is Wainiha significant for that, but if you go to the Alakai Plateau and Waialeale, at that highest point on the island, there's actually a platform of rocks, a small heiau, if you will, with coral rubble that was brought painstakingly up from the coast and placed up there. The significance of that heiau is not clear to modern people, and yet we know that that place held very deep cultural significance as a result.
Sam, this remarkable area is really isolated. What kind of threats does it face?
Well, you would think that in a place as isolated as Wainiha, that hasn't seen much impact from human activities over the centuries, that it would be remarkably pristine. And in fact, relative to other places in the Hawaiian Islands, it is remarkably pristine. This is what gives us the opportunity to get ahead of the game. Normally, we're having to deal with a whole range of introduced pests, whether it's feral pigs or rodents or nasty weeds such as Clydemia or Myconia, coqui frogs, for example. But Wainiha has almost none of those. There are some establishing populations of Australian tree fern that got in there probably as a result of Hurricane Iniki, when millions of spores were able to establish in the disturbed landscape. Once they become established into a place, the combination of their aggressive, fast-growing nature and the fact that they're spewing out millions of spores means that in a short amount of time, the huge biological diversity in the vegetation of Wainiha might be overrun by these tree ferns. If tree fern became suddenly the dominant plant in there, in fact, if it came close to being nothing but Australian tree ferns in there, then we would lose the complex structure of the vegetation in Wainiha and on the Alaka'i Plateau. It's that structure that captures the moisture from the air. There's a Hawaiian saying that clouds follow the forest. And part of that is the way that the vegetation of native forests, both in the canopy layers and then down through secondary trees and shrubs and then down into the ferns and mosses below, all work together to gather up the moisture and make Kauai one of the most significant watersheds, for example, in the whole state. You know, we live on islands, and it's the ecological services of the native ecosystems here that gives us our quality of life. And we're just thinking ahead to how important those native species are in maintaining our own lives and lifestyles. I think that it's not just for the sake of these native species, but for everything that lives on these islands that we protect these things for the future.
The discussion about the complexity of the life there, we've been talked a lot about the plants, but there's also birds living in the trees, birds living in the cliffs, fish and snails living in the streams. What are some of the values of having a complex ecosystem?
Well, it's an amazing thing. You mentioned the birds living in the cliffs. This is the endangered Hawaiian petrel. It's a seabird that spends most of its life out in the open ocean. In the fall, they come in and they nest in the wet cliffs of Wainiha. That in itself is an amazing thing. That there be seabirds nesting in the cliffs there. There are Hawaiian honeycreepers, our native forest birds that live not only on the plateau but in the upper reaches of Wainiha Valley. As you mentioned, there are native fish that live only in our Hawaiian streams that need to send their eggs down into the ocean, and then they, like salmon, the young come back up into the streams again. All of these things have great biological value, scientific value, cultural value. All of them, for example, have Hawaiian names, and you know that they were important to people of old.
Sam, you're not only a scientist, but you're traditionally trained as a Hawaiian chanter. How do those two things work together in your work?
You know, it's really interesting because when you enter into a place as special as Wainiha, you feel its significance. As a person traditionally trained in chant, I think on some of the ancient chants that were composed on the island of Kauai that include the valley of Wainiha and the scent of the lauae. And so there's this double significance. All of those things add up as the reasons why places like these need to be preserved into the future. So I'm thinking that I would like to share one of the traditional chants that mentions the scent of the lauae as well as the valley of Wainiha that comes to us from traditional sources.
Mapuka hanu o talawa mapuno kapole o kawai aloha aloha I ke kapa e hukai huki pala e huki lohe no e kahuna no e maila ka le hua makano no e ka le hua makano no e vivo ole te anu I ke alaki papa ola e alai kuhi lima kanaka o mauna hina e hina no pahau au ale no hina no pahai ka ua tahanu e aliala e he anu ale no
Thank you, Sam, for that beautiful chant. Wainiha is a remarkable place. I'm Jan ten Bruggencate for the Science Channel. See you next time.